This is going to be an interesting one. So over here, we have the Samsung Galaxy J7, but probably not the one you're thinking of. This is actually the 2016 model, which is interesting because it was the second best-selling phone of that year, right behind one of Xiaomi's phones. This really showed the start of a trend where mid-range phones are becoming more and more prevalent and powerful. For half the price of a flagship, you can get much more than half the value. Starting with build quality, it's overall really good. The phone is fairly slim at 7.8 millimeters and it feels good in the hand. We've got the glass display on the front, aluminum rails on the side, and yes, a plastic back, so no fingerprints here. In terms of I/O, we've got the micro USB port for charging and, believe it or not, a headphone jack. While we're on the subject of audio, the single speaker, which is actually on the back of the device, is really loud, but it's easy to cover up with your finger while you're holding the phone. Of course, this is a mid-range phone from more than 2 years ago, so the specs aren't exactly something to get super excited about. The J7 2016 is rocking the Snapdragon 617 or the Exynos 7870 depending on your region, a 720p display, 16 gigs of storage, only 2 gigs of RAM, a 13 megapixel camera, and a 3300 mAh battery. At first glance, this phone seems like outdated trash, right? Well, it is in some respects, but in others, it still performs admirably. Take the display, for instance. Yes, it is 5.5 inches in 720p, but it's using a Super AMOLED panel, and as anyone with a discerning eye will tell you, Samsung has some of the best OLED tech in the industry. This means that the display has deep blacks and vibrant colors. Wallpapers, YouTube videos, and movies look great on this device, as long as you don't look too closely because it is still 720p. But to be honest, I'm not even sure if I would prefer a 1080p LCD. The colors on this display just look so good. Now, most people will look at the spec sheet and assume that performance is pretty bad, and they are somewhat correct in that assumption. A mid-range chip from 2 years ago paired with only 2 gigs of RAM only goes so far. For most things, it does okay, actually including gaming. I was able to play PUBG without dropping too many frames since the display is only 720p. Its biggest weakness in terms of performance is multitasking. 2 gigs of RAM just isn't cutting it anymore. Good luck having more than 3 applications open without one of them being unloaded from the memory. There is actually a built-in multitasking feature where you can have 2 applications open on screen at the same time, but I don't find myself using it much because the applications slow down to a crawl while you're trying to do too many things at once. In terms of storage, there is only 16 gigabytes on board, but there is microSD card support for up to 256 gig cards. While you're inserting your SD card, you'll also come across the dual SIM card slots and yes, the battery. This phone has a fully removable battery that you can access by popping off the back. Removable batteries used to be a super common feature a few years ago, even on flagships. Now that many phones are slabs of glass and aluminum, this feature has been ditched in favor of aesthetics and overall build quality. While we're on the subject, let's talk about that battery. As I said, it is 3300 mAh, which is pretty average at best for today. The thing to remember here though, is that this phone has a mid-range chip and a 720p display, meaning it uses much less power than your typical flagship. As a more conservative user, I can easily get 2 days out of this thing, and I suspect that most people should get 1.5 days or more, easily making battery life this phone's biggest strength. From the best, let's go to the worst. I've been avoiding it so far, but we need to talk about the camera. The main shooter is a 13 megapixel f1.9 sensor, but the specs only take it so far. The camera can only shoot 1080p video at 30 FPS, which is a real downer. Also, there are no bells and whistles here. No bokeh, no second lens, not even any foca. On auto mode, it's really hit or miss. I've gotten some pretty good shots, including the best one, which is this red flower in Costa Rica. Under decent lighting, with steady hands, patience, and the HDR mode on, you can get some decent shots. There isn't much dynamic range, but you can tell what's going on. Other than video, the biggest weakness of the camera is low light. You would think with the f1.9 aperture it would look okay, but most times the photo just comes out looking completely black, which leaves the front camera. It's only 5 megapixels and looks bland with little detail. I wouldn't recommend using it. Smartphone camera technology, especially the software aspect, has been the biggest improvement from year to year on phones, and this shows how much improvement has took place recently. This camera is only from 2 years ago, but is easily the weakest link on this phone. Now, let's get to the elephant in the room. Software is not usually a strong point on Samsung phones, whether it be the TouchWiz bloat or uncertainty about future updates and support. This phone came out in April of 2016 and shipped with Android 6.0.1 Marshmallow, which was the newest version at the time. In total, I have gotten 3 software updates pushed to this device, the first one being in late 2017. This was the all-important Nougat update with an overhaul of the UI and some added security features. After that, there were 2 more minor, mostly security updates, one a few months after the first, and another one while I was making this review. According to the GSM Arena page, this phone is going to be getting Android 8.0, but I found through a bit of my own research that there is a huge disparity in when you receive the software updates from device to device. If this device ever does get Oreo, I'm certain that will be the last update unless there is a major security issue or vulnerability. In terms of the actual UI, I mean, it's
Samsung Experience.
So you either get along with it or you hate it. In all the shots you've seen in this video, I've been using Nova Launcher instead. I prefer to have one cohesive app drawer with more flexibility with widget size and what's displayed on screen. Also, some third-party launchers let you hide icons for certain apps in the app drawer, which can help declutter the bloat from your device. As for price, well, we're not even going to talk about that. Don't get me wrong, this phone can definitely be had for less than $200 depending on where you look, but nobody should be buying it new right now. There are so many better options out there from the likes of Xiaomi and OnePlus. The Samsung Galaxy J7 2016 is mostly outdated hardware that is already nearing the end of software support, but that doesn't mean it's completely useless. The main point of this review was twofold. Show how far mid-range phones have come in the last couple of years, and also that if you get this phone handed down to you after your dad or your cousin upgrades, it will still be perfectly usable in 2018. It can handle most things surprisingly well and will serve you faithfully until you replace it. Oh, and one last thing. When you want to charge this phone up to 100%, grab a cup of coffee in your favorite Star Wars movie because it takes almost 3 hours.